Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Then check out Deal to Heal Teas. With our inspirational teas, you're sure to find something to inspire you. That's dealtohealteas.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.com. Again, that's dealtohealteas.com. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you'll enjoy the Girl Dad Discussion podcast. I'm your host, Ernest James, and I believe the relationship between a daughter and her father is one of the most important relationships a young lady can have. And therefore, my mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by sharing the voices of girl dads to the world. So check out our podcast on every platform where podcasts can be listened to. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel. Again, that's the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with your host, Ernest James. Welcome to Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I'm your host, Ernest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you guys check us out at our new YouTube channel, which is the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network, and check us out on all of your podcast listening platforms. There at the website, at the YouTube channel, you can find our podcast, the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, as well as the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, which is our sister podcast. And there's also two other podcasts that is there that you also can check out. So again, that's our new YouTube channel, the Deal to Heal with Deal to Heal Podcasting Network. Make sure that you guys check us out there. So we're going to jump right into this thing right away. I am here today, just like any other day, with a guest. We are blessed with a guest. Jason, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? Appreciate you bringing me on.
No problem. Thank you for being here, because you could have been doing anything else with anyone else. But you're here with me and my listeners, and we definitely appreciate it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, but we're going to jump right in it. Do me a favor, introduce yourself to my audience and let us know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I am Jason Pockrant. I am a TEDx speaker and author, self-published 2 books on Amazon, pretty much a serial entrepreneur. I've been doing different business, made it out of the suit and tie life, the professional world years ago, and spend most of my days just hanging out with my 2 daughters, trying to be as present as I can with them, and doing self-employment and some other entrepreneurship, helping dads figure out how to have better relationships, better connect, and fully engage with their daughters. So,
I love it. And as you stated, you do have daughters, and so whenever I have other girl dads on, because I am a girl dad myself, of course, I always start off by asking 2 questions, and those 2 questions are: what does it mean for you to be a girl dad, and then what is something that your daughters have taught you?
I'd say what it means for me to be a girl dad, it means that you have to be most willing and most comfortable to let out some of your most emotional sides that you probably wouldn't have if you weren't a girl dad.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would say my daughters have taught me is that I'd say that my daughters taught me that they see, hear, and feel way more of what I do, what I say, and how I speak than I could imagine. The idea that they're watching you, but when
Mhm.
you really, really realize everything that you do, they're watching and judging to see how we're going to act or react.
Mhm.
I think that's been a real game changer for me.
Yeah, yeah, love it, love it. Yeah, Jason, we're definitely gonna have to get you on the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, and we can dive more deeper into that daddy daughter relationship.
Sure.
On the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, we actually started that podcast to combat the narrative of the absent father and the fatherless daughter, and we do that by promoting the voices of girl dads and their daughters occasionally to the world to know that there are dads out here that are very active in their daughters' lives, as myself being a girl dad. So that's what we do there. Definitely look forward to having you on that podcast as well, so we can talk about everything girls, right?
Absolutely. But
But we're here today, and I'm a actually just kind of just go back through your story because they're definitely I know you're a dad now, you know what I mean, and you work with dads, helping them to do business and different ways, but your story actually started your journey with around your dad and your relationship with your own father. So do us a favor, just let's just go back as far as you would like, and just kind of tell us your story and how you even, your relationship with your dad and how that kind of brought you into the area where you are now.
yeah, absolutely, man. Well, it's funny. It's a funny story, right? So generally, when they get asked that question, right? I kind of blaze through the highlight reels, right? The highlight notes, and people are just kind of like, "Huh, what?" But the interesting concept is it's been this formulation of, my entire life, right? I tell the story. My mom and dad were high school sweethearts. So my mom and dad were high school sweethearts, married till the day he died. 25 years of marriage. I've got an older sister and a younger brother. I was the middle child, right? So the middle child, I was always smart. I went to school, cut my head down, studied, learned. I'm a researcher by nature, right? It's one of my faults still to this day, I would say. But I was this smart kid, the air quotes, right? And so I always tell the world I would watch my mom kind of coddle my younger brother, and I would watch my dad and my sister kind of have their struggles and their debates, right? Um, but unfortunately, back when I was 17 years old, or shortly before that, right, my dad got hit by a drunk driver, got connected to a bad doctor, and got addicted to somas. So I spent most of my childhood, right, kind of avoiding the police, hiding from the fights and the lights, as I would call it. You know, um, I watched some highs, I watched some lows. I got a lot of bad memories, that I can remember my dad. I don't remember much. I don't remember much of my childhood. I just kind of remember getting through it, right? Kind of
Mhm.
just keeping to myself, not ruffling feathers, right? Trying to make sure everybody was okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure people can relate to being the helper, subconsciously or not. And that was kind of the case. And then there's these 3 fateful days. And I talk about this. I went to college, right? My dad died when I was 17 years old. And so I decided, with everything that I had, all my power, I was going to figure out how my dad died, right? I was going to solve the mystery. Like literally at the time, at 17 years old, I was hell bent on figuring out what had happened, right? So I was like, I'm going to go be a criminal investigator. I'm going to go be a psychologist. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, right? But when I was only 17 years old, there was a Wednesday when we finally decided to leave the house. So my mom had finally had enough, right? She was going to file for divorce. We packed up our car. We were going to go live with my grandma. That Wednesday afternoon, I remember being the last one to leave the house. I packed up my stuff. I had a 1997 Dodge Intrepid, blue. And I remember leaving the front door and my dad standing there on the front porch. And he said, "Promise me you'll come see me, son." I said, "I promise, Dad." And I packed up my stuff and I left. That Thursday, the next day, I remember I went over to the house. I went to go see him. I remember walking in the front door, seeing my dad in the chair, passed out again. And so mad, right? Just livid in all the emotions and all the questions of why couldn't you stop? Why couldn't you change? Why didn't you get better? Why didn't you do what you told us you would do? And I remember I made a choice that day and I left him there. I didn't wake him up. I didn't say hi. I went to the fridge. I grabbed a pop. I turned around and I walked back out. Friday afternoon rolls around. We're at my grandma's house. I remember 17 years old at the time, right? I was doing what 17-year-old boys would do at the time. I remember I got into a big argument with my mom and my brother about a backpack. Till this day, there's memories where they call me backpack boy. They said, "What's in the backpack? What's in the backpack?" They said, "Backpack, backpack." And I remember I got picked up by a girl. I left. And while I was out doing foolish things as a young boy, my mother and my younger brother went back to the house that night. I went to go check on my dad. And it was that night on a Friday when my younger brother and my mom found my dad. At 47 years old, he had had a heart attack, and he passed away. And then there's the memories of that night, right? Getting the phone call in grandma's living room, and then rushing over to the house and pacing. I remember pacing in the streets, about ready to punch the lights out of the ambulance. And I remember watching him take pictures inside there's this big bay window at the house we lived in. And I can still remember to this day watching my dad being wheeled out across in front of me on a gurney, covered in a white sheet. And he was gone. And it was that moment. I tell people, right, it was 3 days and 4 choices. That was the name of a blog post I wrote for the Good Men Project years and years ago. And then when I was fortunate enough to give a TEDx talk at my own college, my alumni was Saginaw Valley State University, and I remember it was their very first TEDx event, and I was the very first speaker at their first and only TEDx event, and the theme was Roots and Wings. And I remember when I got selected, I did the video and I sent it in, I got picked, and that was the first time ever that I stood on stage and really told the world the real truth about my dad and my story. And I called it Fatherless to Fatherhood, the Journey. Because it was up until that point, I had essentially spent 8 years of my life, from 17 until 26 or 27, whatever I was, with the shame and the blame and the guilt, hiding in the shadows, going to school for all the wrong reasons, to get a degree that I didn't want, to get a job at a field I couldn't stand, with student loan debt that I didn't need, all because I was convinced, because I lost my dad, because I was convinced that I could figure out what had happened to him, and I could figure out how to help solve the wound that little boy had dealt by losing his father. So that's kind of, I guess, the backstory, if you would.
Right.
Depending on where you want to take it, right? Then we weave into 28 years old, met my wife, we got married. A couple years later, had our first daughter, self-published the first book, or no, that would have been the second book. And then, did some other things, but yeah, I'm just a guy, man, on a mission, trying to help dads be more present, right? And help them figure out what it means to really, 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 truly. I always tell people my superpower is helping you have your midlife crisis at age 30 as opposed to age 50.
Right.
So
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit because
yeah.
You talked about the events with your dad and then doing that TEDx talk. Was that kind of like the beginning of what you do now, the work that you do now? Um, you know, with that TEDx talk, or was that just something that you had to get off your chest and then you just kind of went back to you know your everyday life, should I say?
No, so it was back in, so I lost my dad in 2004. It was Good Friday that year as well, which is always just an ironic, terrible experience, right? If you think about it, for any believers or Christians out there listening. But yeah, 2004, April 9th, 2004 was the year I lost my dad. It was Good Friday that year. And I remember afterwards, I was going to a local church and I met a pastor there. The pastor at the church had introduced me to his son. Him and I hit it off. We became really good friends. We started doing business stuff, coaching stuff, some other things. I helped him kind of, transition out of his, retail job, kicking rocks, as we like to say, and got into doing his painting and his art and things, right? But the pastor and I, we developed a really, really good relationship. And he had a 21-year-old son he had lost to leukemia years ago. And he also taught the grief share class. So like grief share, for anyone out there listening, right? It's trademarked. It's a Christian class on grief. And so he introduced me, or he invited me to the class. And I took this grief share class. And when I was in the grief share class, I remember I met an older woman. Her name was Alice. She was in her 80s. And at the time, I had met a coach, right? It's called a life coach, right? An individual in his 50s who had done the thing. He had done it all right, and he helped other people. He took me under his wing kind of and took me in and started helping me sort of craft my voice and find my mission and help me with my purpose. He was the very first one. This was back in 2012 when I started financial coaching. My wife and I, we got engaged. We went through Financial Peace University. We did the Dave Ramsey thing for a while. So how it all started, right, was that drive and that purpose where I was like, listen, you don't have to struggle. Like, nobody needs to struggle. It's not that hard, like you just make a budget, you live, like you figure it out, right? It sounds so much easier to say it, but so I started financial coaching. And then eventually my coach, Terry, invited me into the very first high school. So I got to speak to a classroom full of kids. I remember the very first time I talked to a classroom full of kids at one of the alternative high schools. In 2012, right? I had the actual pieces of paper, right? So you pass out a paper, right? I came up with these questions like, what did you think of my talk? And what was your name? And what did you like? And it still resonates with me to this day. I still have a folder full of those sheets from a couple talks I gave to these kids. But one kid wrote down, I haven't cried in 9 years. I forgot what it felt like. And I was like, man, I'm just getting chills thinking about it. So as far back as 2012, it was financial coaching and then life coaching. And then, just, you don't have to struggle. And then it was figure out your purpose and your passion. And that morphed into, as a fatherless boy, I tell people the fatherless boys become fatherless men who become fatherless fathers. Right. And there's that fatherhood wound, right? If we all know the book, Wild at Heart by John Eldredge, right? Like that struck me for a while, for the longest time, about this wound that I had. And I was like, after age 18, we're forgotten about. From 18 to 30, we're the fatherless men that are just abandoned. There's no more foster care. There's no more programs. There's no more assistance. Like, it's like, what do you do? So for me, I was that kid, right? I was the 28-year-old man, fatherless, no grandpas, no uncles, no mentors, no groups, no, just going through life. And then you meet a woman, you get engaged, you get married, and then bam, you have a kid. And it's, I digress. I forgot what the question was, but
no, that's good. That's good because you kind of went where I wanted to go with it. Because then you get married and then you do have your own kids. So how did your experience with your father and especially being resonated with you as being a fatherless son when it came to actually time for you to now you are a father yourself raising your daughters? How did that relationship or the lessons from that relationship with your dad transform to how you show up as a father to your daughters?
yeah, great question. Well, I mean, it sounds cliche, right? But everything I do now and everything I've done on a subconscious level or not was always to just be, for the longest time, right? I was on this mission to just be better than my father, right? Like, and after years of therapy and years of trauma, right, you realize kind of how twisted that is to like be better than your dad, right? Because you don't want to weaponize your father or your mother or your brother or son, whoever it was, right? And it took me years and years of therapy too before I got to the realization of saying, don't hate the addict, hate the addiction, right? Like it wasn't my dad. It was battles and demons that he could not fight himself, right? That he couldn't get past. But for me, my whole life, it was just watching my dad grow up and kind of work hard. So he was a mechanic. He was he was the sales guy. He was the mechanic. He was the hard working, like physical labor kind of guy, and I'm not. I'm book smart, street smart. I'm book smart, not street smart, as I always say. I'm the visionary, the idea guy, the strategist. I'm the bookworm. I'm the learner. So my whole life, I've kind of just always been like trying intentionally to avoid like getting stuck in the hard work, the hustle and the grind, and the just work hard for 40 years and just work hard, and then and hope your relationship's there. And it's interesting too because there was a weekend back when I was younger. When I first decided I wanted to like be an author, write or quote, tell my dad's story. I self-published this little pamphlet or little short booklet. It's on Amazon. It's called The Confident Father's Guidebook. It was 5 steps to personal transformation. And years later, again, after therapy, right, there was kind of the realization that me publishing that was sort of telling the world my story, because I spent most of my life in my own family feeling like I didn't have a voice. And it was my way of telling the story. Until this day, right, I'm going to knock on wood. I'm sure my mom or my sister won't hear this, but they get pissed and they get mad at me, and they're like, don't talk about this stuff. Don't air dad's dirty laundry. We ain't got to talk about it. We don't got to talk about dad, but it's my story, and I've got the right to tell it, And so like my whole life was like, how do I become a better dad? How do I become a present father? Like, it's not quality time, it's just time. How do I be with my kids as much as I can, as humanly possible? If that means figuring out, and that's what morphed me into all the self-employment and all the business stuff. It was kind of this constant drive to never have to work for somebody and be away from my kids, because it's all I saw. I watched my dad, put on the work boots, and kick rocks every day for, until he was 47 years old. And the flip side of this coin, right? I give people credit. I remember the first time I saw it, there was a comment that someone left on the TEDx talk on YouTube. And it was something to the effect of like, give me a break. Fatherless, this kid had his dad till he was 17. And I tell people all the time, like, fatherless fathers, and you can relate, Ernest, with what you do, the work, right? Death, divorce, or abandonment, you can call it what you want. The amount of fathers that I've interviewed over the years, and I was like, hey, what's it like being a fatherless father? Oh, I'm not fatherless. I mean, my dad works 60 hours a week, and he's never home, and he's gone all the time, and I don't talk to him or see him or do anything, but I'm not fatherless. I'm like, okay. Yeah. Or the men, they're like, my dad's a piece of crap, hate the man, lives down the street. If I could see him, I was like, well, my dad's gone. And I would gladly trade places with you if I could have him back. So, like, think about the words you use, the thoughts you think, the feelings you have, but it all gets deeper. It gets into just us solving that wound, right? Because us fatherless men have that wound. And with the other podcasts, I'm sure, right? Like, I used to think it was the craziest thing, this concept of fatherless daughters. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, the wound that women have. I've talked to 20-year-old girls, talked to 40-year-old women that have a fatherhood wound as well from their dad. If we can't figure out our shit, if we can't figure out how to heal, how to deal, and how to fulfill what our purpose is.
Right.
And that's kind of just, like the summary version too of how I got to it, right? Is like my purpose in losing my father became being such a damn good dad to my daughter. First kid was a daughter. She's 10 now. And then my second child is a little 4-year-old girl. So 2 daughters. But then still, that's how the second book came out as well, right? It was literally, I literally was like, I lost my dad. I'm 28 years old. I got my wife pregnant. And the question is, I'm going to be a father, and it's going to be a girl. And the question is, hey, if you're a dad, if you're a girl dad, I went out and I asked the world, I was like, if you're a dad, what is one piece of advice you would tell a brand new dad on how to raise a daughter? And I got 10. I thought at the time, right, I thought it was going to blow up. I was going to write this huge book. I have all these guys that would want to contribute a chapter. It'd be the most incredible thing. But I got 10 incredible dads that each wrote a chapter and answered that one question for me. And I compiled their stories. And then at the end of each chapter, I put these conversation starters, these questions that I came up with in the hopes that dads would read the book and have a conversation with their daughter, right? Better engage and fully connect with their girls. And then it was going to be men's groups and church groups and all that kind of, but that was the thing. But that came from my own selfish need. I literally was like, when my dad died, I lost my dad, I lost my grandpa. my dad's sister had overdosed. Like, I grew up around that stuff, like not to a wild extent of some people, but there was drugs and it was violence and it was like I didn't have good mentors. I didn't have a good
Mhm.
church group. I didn't have a support group, and I just felt like this lonely, wounded boy that didn't have his daddy.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he got married, and then he became a dad, and and then that's how I went to college. Right, I got to a point in my life too. I tell this story sometimes. I got to the crossroads. It was either drugs or education, and
Mm.
I knew in my life I was either going to hang out with. I was either going to go down the path of the group of friends that I hung out with in high school, or I was going to go be smart, put my head down, and just get good grades and do good. Just go to school and do good. And that's literally what I did. I mean, that's all the wrong reasons for getting a criminal justice degree too. I was steered wrong by the college and sold on a bag of rocks, I think. But I just did it. It was easy. So I just went to school for 2 years, and then I got the degree, and then I thought I'll get a job, and then I was like, this is absolutely terrible, and then I was like, what do I do? Um,
Right.
but yeah, just
Yeah.
it came from just trying to be a better dad, and then it just came from trying to be better than my dad, morphed into just being a good dad,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
being
I
here.
love that. Yeah, I love that. I want to go back to a couple of things that you said because um, you first thing you mentioned about getting to the point where you were able to be upset with the addiction and not your dad,
Yeah,
right? And you mentioned that your dad was a mechanic. So my dad was a mechanic too, and my dad went through a season of his life where he was had struggled with alcohol addiction. You know what I mean? And I remember I did a podcast episode on a podcast called The Untapped Keg, right? And the host of that podcast was a guy who had, going through his own sobriety. And so he, had conversations with other people talking about, sobriety with drinking. And so I was able to share my dad's story from my viewpoint,
yeah,
from watching him, over the years, and having that conversation really opened up my eyes as I began to talk about it because it really made me think about the different things that he was dealing with, that led him to drinking. At that time when I was younger, we were like, I like to say higher middle class,
yeah.
lifestyle. My dad worked for the phone company. He ran lines like the telephone wires and all of that. So at that time, that was a really good job. We had the house, we had the dog. You know what I mean? We
Mhm.
had the camper. We would take trips and all of that, right? And I don't know what happened because I was young, but something happened and we ended up losing everything. Right? I know we had moved away to a different state, and then when we came back. So when we moved we lived in Illinois. We moved out of Illinois to another state, and they transferred him. The job transferred him there. But when we came back, for whatever reason, they wouldn't transfer him back.
Yeah,
So that kind of threw everything off, and we eventually lost everything,
yeah.
right? And then my uncle, who was my dad's best friend, who actually was my mom's brother, right? So that's crazy too, because they literally lived right across the street from each other.
Mhm.
My mom and dad lived directly across the
Okay.
street from each other growing up, and my dad was best friends with my uncle, which kind of led him to how he got to know my mom, and then they ended up getting married. Long story short, anyway, my uncle got killed at that time too, right? And so you're dealing with losing everything that you had. You lose your best friend. And he was murdered, so it wasn't like
Wow.
he just passed away in his sleep, like someone murdered him.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself with your wife, your 9 kids, and you're sleeping in one bedroom in his mother's house, which was my grandmother. And so it's just like that whole thing. So with me doing that podcast episode, it allowed me, as I was talking about it, to really think about like, man, I probably would have been drinking too. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it's like, man, I really was able to understand it, just like, and then with me being a father now too, at that time was like, man, I understand why, he it was so hard for him to let the drinking go and stuff at that time, because it probably was the only thing that was helping him stay together,
Yeah.
for those years. And luckily for me, or should I say for him, after some years, he was able to be like, all right, I'm done, and
Yeah.
and let go of the drinking and everything. And he's doing great now.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, so it was that thought process though, like you said, to really be like, you know what, it wasn't necessarily him, it was the addiction and those things that was causing him to hold on to that. Because I don't think no one, just wake up one day and be like, you know what, I think I want to be an addict. You know what I'm saying? It's like usually either they're experimenting or they're trying to get away from something. You know what I
Oh,
mean? And
absolutely.
that kind of leads them, down that rabbit hole, unfortunately. You know.
Well, I think personally, right, and over the years, the way as I thought about it, and the more, um, I still have my dad's sister around, right? She's I don't know,
Mhm.
almost 70 now, and like best friend, right? Like it was my dad and Aunt Diane. They were like together. It was them their whole life, right? Their other sister, Aunt Debbie, unfortunately had overdosed in her bed one night when she was young too. Um, but when I hear the stories, like my aunt would tell me stories about my dad's um, Grandpa Kenny, who was who raised like Kenny and Nana raised my dad and my Aunt Diane because my dad's mom had kind of ran off and wasn't in the picture. Well, for a while, but my dad's real dad, I never met him. I never,
Mhm.
I don't think like my dad's dad. Like it's just, oh, that's your dad. That's Dean's dad. That's your dad's. That's Grandpa Toby. That's your dad's dad. I'm like, I don't know the guy. I don't know the man. Never knew the man. But when I hear about Grandpa Kenny, like Grandpa Kenny was a beast. Like Grandpa Kenny was Golden Gloves boxer. Like back in 1939 in the city we live in, like on the plaques. But Grandpa Kenny was also a raging drinker, and Grandpa Kenny was the one who had more points on his driver's license by the time he was 15 before he got it. And then like I hear stories of my dad who stole Grandpa's car and got pulled over at 15 years old. Right, had tickets on his license before he got it. And I think a thing that we don't think about, for myself, 38 years old, or for
Mhm.
you, we don't stop and look at our fathers. We don't look at our father's father, right? Like, so we got to understand our fathers who were wounded and injured, like, like, like as a human, right? Like their dads were trying to raise them the best they could. Like we
Mhm.
got to think about what did Grandpa have to raise his son in 1940, and how did he what did he have? Like what skills was he equipped with for emotional well-being? Like he didn't have better help, he didn't have therapy, he didn't have what I mean. So you got to think like our dads did the best they could with what they had, and our
Yeah.
fathers, right, when they were struggling. And I tell this story, right, like I would be up all night in my room. I had one of those small little radios, those little digital clock radios with like the 5 buttons on top and the bright red lights. And I would have
Mhm.
it at the head of my bed, and I would always listen to Delilah at night, and they'd call in and play the love songs on Delilah. And that was the only way I could go to sleep because my dad, I used to tell people, was always the normal, right? It was a 6 pack of Budweiser and a handful of pills. Like, and to a point, you get to a point where that was his everyday, like it was normal. He would be up all night. He'd be drinking. He'd be playing music. My mom always jokes he would take shit apart and put it back together. Like he would break a radio and stuff, and then he'd put together these little model cars and stuff. So
Yeah.
like when I think about my dad, I remember the man that was up all night, and then I would be in my bedroom. And then if my mom and dad got in the fights, then the cops would show up, and then I would remember hiding, and I didn't want to come out, and I didn't want to talk to anybody, and But then I'd wake up the next morning, like everything was fine, and I'd go to school, and I'd come
Yeah.
home, and I'd do it again. I'd do it again. Um, but it was a conversation I had with my friend one time, and she was talking about her dad. And, I was talking to a friend, she's an older woman, older woman, and she was telling me about her dad, and it was that idea that she was like, he didn't know, like he was just doing the best he could, and you have to stop like hating the person or thinking like, you know. So for me, it's been this idea too of, I'm going to be the one to break the cycle.
Mhm.
I'm going to be the one, the oldest son is just myself, my younger brother, right? So like I'm the last, well, me and my brother, we're the last Pockrants. Like there is no more of my father. It's just me. This is what I got left. But I kind of take pride on being one of the few to break that generational curse of addiction and And then I want to be here for the girls to help them see what it's like, because it's also a really, really crappy feeling that they don't get grandpa, that
Yeah.
they never met my dad. My dad never met my wife. He never met my kids, you know? And there's days that that's really, really, really hard to accept too. But I got to that point. It was like, you can't. I got to a point in my life, Ernest, sorry. Um, I used to walk, and this was coaching with Terry, but I used to walk around and kind of tell my dad's story and use it as this crutch, right? And I would think like my dad's story was my story. Like I was my dad's story. Like I grew up fatherless, and then my dad overdosed, and then I got to a point where I just got so tired of talking about my dad was addicted to somas. My dad got hit by a drunk driver, like, and then it eventually kind of flipped. At some point in my life, a lot of therapy, it kind of flipped to the point where my dad's story is a part of my story, but it can become the foundation that I stand upon
Mm-hmm.
as part of what I do in my life, right? Um, Not all of just who I am. So kind of after, and that was like years later, right? It was this realization of like, I was super, super heavy into interviewing fatherless fathers and talking about all that. And then like, 3, 4, 5 years later, it's kind of like the light bulb went off, and I was like, that was a really, really personal, peaceful cleansing that I kind of had to go through to
Yeah.
then come out of. And then that's how I got into like, the helping dads do business and speaking and coaching and like marketing stuff and the other things. And now it's just kind of like, hey, we're all the cool business dads that want to hang out, talk about business, marketing, do cool shit or do stuff. And then like go spend time with their daughters. We're not going to work every day. We're not clocking in. We're not punching in and punching out, because we realize like the purpose and the passion in life is so much bigger, and our girls need so much more. And when you're somebody like you who's gone through it yourself, when you've gone through all that junk, you're like, my God, there's so many years have been wasted. You're like, I'm not just gonna sit back and take what's given to me. I'm not just gonna
Mm.
punch in and punch out. I'm gonna go. We're gonna, yeah,
Yeah, great, 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 great. I wanna talk about a little bit more about your book, right? Um, because definitely with as a father and as a girl dad, you know, when you become a girl dad,
yeah,
and I think no offense to fathers of sons, but I think having a daughter changes you, as a man. It changes your mindset, it changes your behaviors. Those of us who accept the responsibility, to be a father. Um, but it led me on my journey. It led me to write a book. I wrote an ebook called The Four Core, right, which is
yeah,
the four core values that every daughter should get from her father. And those values came from my own experience of raising a daughter, and my experience of watching my dad raise my sisters. I got five sisters, so
mm-hmm.
that's five different personalities. You know what I mean? And watching him navigate with his relationship with each of them. And I think that it just is so important as fathers, and then as fatherless fathers, and also fatherless daughters, who we don't always have the relationship, or we don't always have the example. You know what I mean? And so I remember my dad. My dad's always been. I grew up in a two-parent household. My dad's always been there, but I remember growing up and watching my friends and some of my even extended family whose fathers weren't around. And just watching the relationships that they had with my dad when my dad would just doing his everyday thing. You know what I mean? And it's like, they just wanted to be around. Or we have times where we're talking, and even now as adults, we have the conversation with some of my oldest friends, and they were like, yeah, man, like, I thought about your dad when I got, to this age, and different things. Like one of my cousins, he was like, he became a mechanic. He was like, yeah, because your dad was a mechanic. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And things of that nature. And you mentioned earlier about, your daughters watching you. And I think that's, with all kids, because I think we're all longing for that father figure, in some way, or some shape or form. And so even when you think they're not watching, not just your daughters, but your daughter's friends is watching, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And their brothers is watching. And I just thought, as I've grown and even having those conversations with, like I said, some of my older friends who's been, friends with since I was young, just to hear them say, yeah, we were around and, we might not have always said something, but, just knowing, being able to say now how much a difference that my dad just being around, what I
Yeah.
mean, made a difference in their lives. And I think that's important as, like we said, we talk to other dads and girl dads and just dads in general, that we have that foundation and recognizing that, so as I want to talk a little bit about more about your book, actually both of them, before we get out of here. So you mentioned about the second one, let's go back to the first one. And you said you kind of wrote that to kind of vent almost. But what is, as me, as a person now that said, what, let me go grab this book, I want to read it. What do you hope that now that you're the reader will get from that book?
Well, I think so man, it's been years ago if I can remember. The Confident Father's Guidebook was essentially you are worthy. Stuck is an illusion, not a place. You're worth so much more. It's kind of those, those are like three of the core tenets. And it was about purpose and passion, right? Because I remember going through it with Terry when I was coaching with Terry. And I remember one night we were it's group coaching. We were sitting there in the studio, and there was these two like multicolored chairs, and I stood up, and I was like, oh man, I want to do this and I want to do that. I want to coach, I want to speak, and I want to help, but I don't know if I could do it, and I don't know if I'm good enough, and I don't know if anyone will listen or anyone will pay attention, and this. And I remember he got up and he walked in the back, and he came back out with a small brown box, and he literally threw it at my feet, and he said, Jason, if you want to stay in the box and just get back inside of it. And I remember I picked it up and I just started crying my eyes out, and I started bawling, and I just ripping it up. And I was like, I don't want to be in the box. I want to get out of the box. I want to do more. I don't want to stay inside the box. And I just ripped it up and I threw it down, and I stood there and I stared at this pile of cardboard on the ground. And he said, Jason, and I was like, and that was that moment, right? We talked about like your worst day and your best day. That was that moment I stopped and I looked at him and I was like, oh my God. I was like, Terry, I said, losing my dad, I said, everything I'm doing is for dad. Like everything is because of that. I was like, everything I want to do, this big purpose, this mission, this Les Brown kind of esque, purpose and passion and speaking and helping dads, helping dads, helping dads. Like how? Um, that was always the question. It was losing my father was the worst thing and the best thing that ever could have happened to me, because everything I do, not just work and business and speaking, but every single thing, the way the jobs I take, the jobs I don't, the jobs I've kept, the jobs I've left, like the way I just think about life every day is centralized around this idea of like, is this good for me and my daughters? Is this, am I being a good dad to them, right? Is this going to give me the freedom that I need to go on vacation or to be home with them or to take them off the bus or to put them in like, and that's just a mindset shift that I think 90% of the men in the world don't think, right? They go to provide, they go to work, they need to provide. I talk about that in the TEDx talk, right? We put on our work boots and we strap up, or we put on the suit and tie, and we go to work to provide in the name of providing for the sake of our family at the expense of the relationship with our daughters that will not be there when they're 15, 14, 15, 16, or when they're 30, whatever. But that was like one of those moments where I was like, man, I'm not sure what it is yet. I don't know how I'm going to do it or what it's going to look like or what it's going to be. But that was trampolining me into like this future that I wanted to create and what I wanted to do for my daughters, and as a dad who can help fathers in some small way, because we've all got our unique perspective. We've all got, um, there's our audience, right? Everyone's got our vibe. Like we're going to find our tribe that vibes with us, like there's one or two people that may resonate with something I said tonight. And there's one or two people that are going to resonate with you or your dad, like what you said, I want to point out was interesting. Your adult friends today, like them telling you that, like that's them telling you and speaking into existence for you that they had a fatherhood wound in their lives, in their homes at that time, that they were getting filled from your dad. They weren't asking. They might not have asked for it. They might not have said it, right? They might not even known it, right?
Right.
But like that's the power that we have as fathers for girls or for boys or for the neighbors or for the youth pastors or whoever, right? Like, and it's just I think it's this responsibility that we have that we take lightly or we don't even realize.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the book was that, right? It was like, man, we're worth so much more. Like you can do, and so to finish that off, right? So Terry looked at me and he said, Jason, what you just had happen right there, he said, most people don't realize that until they're 70 or 80 years old. And that was kind of when the light bulb went off. I was like, man, it's like, that's it. That's my that's my midlife crisis when I was 29 years old. I was like, I don't want to get a job. I don't care. I don't want to go make, and then I went into the professional world. I went from stocking shelves at Sam's Club to fully licensed financial advisor, Series 7, Series 6, life, health, disability, home insurance, car insurance, life insurance, sold it all. I did that when I first had my daughter. I call it the suit and tie lie. I did it for a year, hated every minute of it. Because I would sit there and they would tell me, oh, you could just make, you just stay here for 2 years, 3 years, you make $100,000, make $200,000. I said, if it means then I have to sit in an office still for 40 hours a week, shuffling papers and being away from my kids and pretending I'm making a difference, I'm not going to do it. But that's it. It was don't be stuck, as you're worthy of more. Stuck is just an illusion, not a place. I forget the other three, but
yeah.
But yeah, it's because people need to hear it, man.
Yeah.
I talk to 18, 19, 20-year-old kids today, and I tell them blue in the face. I'm like, listen, my friend, if you do nothing else, put $100 a month into the S&P 500, and you will be half of a millionaire at my age today. Like if you don't know, oh, I don't know about this. I'm like, dude, it doesn't even. If anybody had told me that, and I listened when I was 19 or 20,
yeah,
stuff we know today, I can imagine what you and I know today. That we're like, man, I really wish I did that when I was 24, 25.
Man, so much. I was talking to one of the guys at work today. He's 25, right? So I'm 49 now, right?
Okay.
And I'm a bricklayer by trade, and he's a young guy. He's a apprentice, a laborer. And we were having a conversation, and I was just asking him, how old he was. I just met him, so how old are you, and made you want to be a laborer? And we're having that conversation. And I was telling him, when I graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to be a bricklayer. I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Really?
But I didn't know anything about the apprenticeships. I didn't know nothing about the union, none of that. And by the time I found out, which was years later, maybe about 4 or 5 years later, when I found out about the apprenticeships and all of that, and I got in, one of my friends that had graduated with me, right? His dad was a bricklayer, which I didn't know. So when we graduated together. When we graduated, he went right into the bricklayer's field. I went to college, and so by the time I found out about the apprenticeships and bricklaying and all of that, and I got in, his little brother was starting when I was starting, what I mean? And I was like, dude, if I had known, how many years could I have cut off my, added to my career, and just being able to start off like right out of high school doing something that you love, you know what I mean, and making a good living doing it, I could have started a lot earlier. So I wish I had known that, I wish I had had that time to do that. But yeah.
Are you a bricklayer?
Yes, I'm a bricklayer by trade. 22 years or something like that. I've been doing it.
I want to mention this really quick. I just put this in the chat here, right? So there was 2 quotes that I remember I put in the book, and one of them I just put in the chat real quick. It was this quote. It was a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., right? He says, "If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, 'Here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well.'" This quote emphasizes that. I remember I put that in the book, right? I remember that, and then paraphrasing, there was the famous commencement speech that Jim Carrey gave, and he talks about his father, and he says, I raised, at 12 years old, I watched my father live his life as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, I watched my father lose that good job as an accountant. And the lesson I learned in life is that, you know, wow, I'm going to slaughter that moment. The point was that if you could fail at something that you don't like, so you might as well fail at something that you want.
Yeah.
I'll have to find it. We'll leave it in the show notes. But those are two of the points as well, because it was me going through life. So I went to college. I did 2 years. I was going to be a psychologist. At 21 years old, someone said, "You need a master's degree before you can do anything." I said, screw it. I'm not doing that. So I walked into Saginaw Valley, and I was like, and the counselor asked me, she said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And at the time, I literally was convinced still I was going to figure out, I was going to solve the mystery of my dad and how he passed away, right? And how did he have a heart attack? How did it happen, right? And I remember looking at her and I said, "I want to be a criminal investigator." And she printed off a syllabus and said, "Get a criminal justice degree. It'll take you 2 years." And I said, "Okay." And that's what I did. And then when I graduated college with a bachelor's in criminal justice, with no intention of ever being a cop, didn't want to be a probation officer, didn't want to, like, nothing type A, didn't want to do any of that work, okay? Like, I'm calm, cool, laid back. I got a job at a residential treatment home working with abused and neglected teenage males, and it was there when I was sitting on third shift at night, trying not to get punched in the face by kids. That was when I found the 3 books that completely changed my life. It was Quitter by John Acuff. It was The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, and 48 Days to the Work You Love by Dan Miller. And that was when I first discovered that the concept of life coach, and started to think about that. And then that was when I wrote the book. That was when the Confident Father's Guidebook literally was written on third shift on my little BlackBerry, because I woke up one day, I was there one night staring at the moon, and I said, "Damn it, I'm gonna write a book." And I was like, and I remember being up at night talking to, there was one kid there, I forget his name, but there was one kid I remember in the middle of the night doing room checks, and I'd stop and I'd talk to him, and he was like, "Man, you're really good at this stuff. You should go give talks." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of trying. Kind of what I'm trying to do already." But, and it's those moments, 36 years old, how many years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can still remember the one 15-year-old that was like, "You should write a book. You'd be really good at this." Or the one kid that I was an advocate for, that I helped out, But the idea on the flip side, right, as crazy as an entrepreneur I am and the things I do and all the years, I tell people, there are just as many men in the world that are meant to sweep streets. And if that's what you're called to do, I'm a believer, right? So I'll drop it in there. If you're called to do that and that's what you feel God puts on your heart, then, sweep streets like the best of them. But it's those men that are like, "Oh, I just need to provide. I'm going to go be a bricklayer because I can make good money." And then you hate your job, and then you're miserable, and then your marriage crumbles, and your daughter's gone. And it's like, by the time she's 12 years old, man, if you missed all those years because you were out providing, it's too late. There'll be the 20, 30-year-old women on your podcast talking about being a fatherless daughter that didn't realize that until they were 30 years old and they finally started therapy.
Right.
But
yeah. Man, Jason, I definitely appreciate you, man. Definitely appreciate having this conversation. I want you to have the last word, right? And I want you to leave us with a word of advice or inspiration or whatever, however you feel. And then also leave us with your social media handles and things of that nature, where we can find you and follow you and support you. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. To my listeners, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Make sure that you guys are checking us out on our websites. That's dealhealfulfill.org. Also, our inspirational t-shirt line at dealtohealtees.com, and ebooks by ejames.com. I talked about one of the ebooks that I wrote, which is called The Core 4, but there's also an ebook that I wrote called From Males to Men, which is a male mentoring ebook for young boys. There's several ebooks there, so you can go to ebooksbyejames.com to check those out. And also make sure you guys checking us out at our forgivenessmission.com. So over the last couple of years, I've been blessed to be a part of this organization called the Forgiveness Mission. And we do free virtual workshops used to be every quarter. We actually started doing them every other month now. And so they're absolutely free, but we talk about everything surrounding forgiveness of ourselves, forgiveness of others, forgiveness of the world, just everything surrounding forgiveness. So you guys can go to forgivenessmission.com to sign up for our next free virtual workshop. It is absolutely free, but the information is priceless. I think you guys would really enjoy it. So again, you can go to forgivenessmission.com, or you can go to Eventbrite and look up Forgiveness Workshop, which is sponsored by the Forgiveness Mission, in order to sign up for our next free virtual workshop on forgiveness. So again, Jason, I want to say thank you so very much for being on. Thank you for sharing your story. I definitely will make sure I put the links to your books in the description so people can find them and support you that way. I want you to have the last word, so the floor is yours.
Well, I just want to tell you this, man. First and foremost, this is off the record, but I want to thank you, Ernest, because I want to let you know I started this work years ago, 2012, 13, right? And I was everywhere. I was on the podcast circuit. I did all the tours. I did the stuff, right? And then there was a short time in my life where I just kind of slowed down. I peeled back and shifted careers, got into the professional world, got licensed as a realtor. So I've been doing that for the last few years. But it was recently that I re-engaged my purpose and my passion for this work. And I thought about, what I want to do next, right? And part of what I want to do is getting back on the podcast circuit, launching my own podcast next, which is going to be called the One Conversation Away podcast. Because I believe, so one of my last words, I believe truly, no matter who you are, that you are only one conversation away from the rest of your life, whether that's with your boss, with your spouse, with your daughter, with your son, your coworker, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. And I think there's so much power in the conversation. I think it's one of the most important things you can do. And especially for dads with daughters, I think you need to have those conversations. You need to connect with your daughters. And you need to become a present father, which accountability for myself and selfless plug is actually the name of the third book that I plan on launching sometime when I finish writing it. Just pulled out the outline the other day from a couple of years ago. I found it and dusted off with ChatGPT. So, but yeah, life is all about being a present father, and whatever that may mean for you, whatever that might look like. I think if you're a dad, especially a dad with daughters, you need to make it a priority, and you need to make it a focus. And you need to understand that's not quality time, it's simply time. And one of the single greatest things you can do with your daughter is give them that time. A father-daughter date night once a week, if that's as simple as breakfast, if it's as simple as a 30-minute, we play Legos every Thursday night. The men I've talked to that didn't realize that was a thing. It's a thing. So be with your daughters, be fully present, and keep them close.
Yeah. What is your social media handles where we can follow you?
They could just find me on Facebook or Instagram at Jason Pockrant. But if they really want to talk and have a conversation, you can try to find me on Telegram at A Present Father.
All right. I love it. We can't end it no better than that. To my listeners, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, where our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Until next time, you guys be blessed. Thanks for listening to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Remember to listen, like, subscribe, and share. This episode has been brought to you by Deal to Heal Teas. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. Remember, our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for listening.